The morning sun broke through the oaks lining Crescent Lake Estates, a gated neighborhood where everything gleamed: the lawns, the cars, the smiles. But behind those perfect facades lived a current of control, whispered rules, and one woman who made herself queen of it all. Margaret Harlow, known among residents as Karen with a badge, had been HOA president for 6 years. She knew every address, every code, every blade of grass out of place. She believed she was the defender of community standards, but in truth, she ruled through intimidation. Her latest obsession was the small gray house at the end of Willow Lane, the home of Ava Turner, a 7-year-old girl born with cerebral palsy, and her mother, Laura. The Turners had moved into Crescent Lake 2 months earlier. Laura wanted a safe, quiet place for Ava to heal after years of physical therapy. She was a single mother. Her husband, Commander Jack Turner, was overseas on an extended Navy SEAL assignment. Laura hoped to surprise him with a peaceful home when he returned. But peace didn't fit into Margaret Harlow's world. From the first day, she complained. That ramp violates HOA guidelines, she wrote. The paint color is unapproved. Then, that van with the wheelchair lift isn't community compliant. Every letter came with fines, hundreds of dollars for trivial infractions. Laura tried to reason with her, always polite, always hopeful. Mrs. Harlow, my daughter needs those modifications. I can provide medical documentation. Margaret cut her off with a practiced smile. I don't make the rules, dear. I enforce them. But behind that smile was disdain, the kind that saw compassion as weakness. She called Ava's presence a disruption, muttering to others that some people just shouldn't move into planned communities if they can't follow the rules. Ava, unaware of the hostility, tried to enjoy her days. She loved to draw on the porch and wave to the mailman. She wore leg braces and moved slowly, but her laughter carried across the lawns like sunshine. Then one afternoon, while Laura helped her daughter practice walking near the driveway, Margaret drove by in her SUV, slowing down to glare. She rolled down the window. That van better be gone by tomorrow, she snapped. Laura frowned. My husband's out of the country. That van's for my daughter. It's not going anywhere. Margaret's lips thinned. Then maybe you should. It was the first time Laura saw the hate in her eyes. Not annoyance. Not irritation. Hate. That night, Laura emailed Jack. She didn't want to worry him, but she mentioned the harassment, the letters, the threats, the way Margaret had begun circling their home like a hawk. Jack's reply came hours later from a secure military line. Hang tight, Laura. Ignore her. When I'm home, I'll handle it. But by the time Jack returned 3 weeks later, everything had changed. It happened on a Saturday morning. Laura was inside on a call. Ava was on the sidewalk with her therapy walker, trying to draw the flowers by the mailbox. Margaret was across the street, overseeing volunteers for a neighborhood cleanup, clipboard in hand, whistle around her neck like a sergeant. Ava smiled and waved. Margaret didn't wave back. She frowned at the chalk drawings on the curb, bright pink and blue hearts spelling, "Welcome home, Daddy." Graffiti, she muttered. Unacceptable. Ava's voice was soft but cheerful. It's not graffiti, ma'am. It's chalk. It washes away. Something snapped in Margaret. Maybe it was the embarrassment of losing control in front of others. Maybe it was pure cruelty. She stormed over, heels clacking, yelling, "Do you know what you're doing to property values?" Laura heard the shouting and ran out. By the time she reached the curb, Ava had stumbled backward, her walker tipped, and she fell onto the driveway. Margaret was standing over her, red-faced, shouting that these people didn't belong here. Laura knelt beside her daughter, voice trembling. "Ava, sweetie, are you okay?" Ava's hand was scraped and swelling, clearly hurt. Laura turned, furious. "You pushed her." Margaret froze for a split second, then sneered. She tripped. "Don't you dare accuse me." Neighbors peeked through blinds, but said nothing. Silence, the coward's refuge, hung heavy over the cul-de-sac. Laura's hands shook as she helped Ava back inside and called 911. But when the officers arrived, Margaret was already waiting, all smiles and fake charm. "I was the one who called," she lied. The child's mother became hysterical and accused me of things I didn't do. You know how emotional people get. Laura tried to speak, but the officers looked uncertain. No witnesses had seen the shove. No camera covered the curb. Margaret gave her version, calm, rehearsed, and poisonous, while Laura's trembling anger made her sound unstable. No charges, no report, just a quiet warning to stay civil. That night, after putting Ava to bed, Laura sat at the kitchen table with tears streaking her face. She sent one short message to Jack, her voice barely a whisper into the recorder. She hurt Ava. Please come home. And miles away, aboard a Navy transport plane in the middle of the Pacific, Commander Jack Turner listened to the recording 3 times, then stood, silent and cold. He didn't say a word to his unit. But every man on that plane saw his expression and knew that whatever waited for him back home, someone was about to regret it. Jack Turner hadn't felt rage like this since his deployments overseas, not even when facing armed enemies in the desert. There was a difference between rage in combat and rage at home. Out there, anger was survival. Here it was personal. The moment his plane landed on U.S. soil, he didn't even go home to drop his bags. He went straight to Crescent Lake Estates, still in partial uniform, duffel slung across his shoulder, his eyes dark with resolve. When he pulled into the driveway, the neighborhood looked deceptively calm, identical lawns, fluttering flags, trimmed hedges. But when he saw his little girl standing on the porch, her right arm in a brace, her smile weak and uncertain, his pulse thundered in his ears. He crouched, opening his arms. "Hey, sunshine." Ava ran into him, hugging tight. "Daddy, you came back." He felt the small tremor in her body, the stiffness in her arm, and behind the joy in her voice, there was something else. Fear. The kind of fear that no child should ever have. Laura stepped outside, tired but relieved. Her eyes were red from sleepless nights. "Jack, I didn't want to drag you into this while you were still overseas, but he stopped her gently. You don't have to explain. I know." He'd listened to the audio message dozens of times on the flight home. Her tone, Ava's faint cry in the background, and that name, Margaret Harlow, had carved itself into his mind. Jack stood, scanning the quiet street. He could feel the tension here, the same kind that lived in conflict zones. It was the silence before an explosion. A few blinds shifted. Someone watching him from across the street quickly retreated. But one house stood out, white SUV in the driveway, porch decorated with spotless flower pots, American flag flying high. Margaret Harlow's house. That evening, after tucking Ava into bed, Jack and Laura sat in the living room. The lamp cast a soft glow across his face as Laura explained everything: the harassment letters, the ramp complaints, the public confrontations. "She's obsessed with us," Laura said quietly. "She wants us gone. She calls the HOA meetings just to talk about us." Jack leaned back in his chair, the muscle in his jaw twitching. "And the police?" "They said there wasn't enough evidence. No one saw her push Ava. The neighbors don't want to get involved." Jack nodded slowly. Typical. He exhaled deeply, the kind of steady, controlled breath he used before a mission. "Then we make them care." The next morning, while Laura took Ava to therapy, Jack walked the street like a ghost, polite smile, casual steps, but sharp eyes studying everything. He noticed where cameras were placed, which neighbors avoided eye contact, which corners were blind. Every detail stored in that precise, analytical mind honed by years of service. He found Mrs. Alvarez, the elderly neighbor who'd often waved at Ava. She was hesitant at first, wringing her hands. "I saw what happened that day," she whispered finally, "but Margaret told us not to get involved. She said the HOA would handle it." Jack's voice was low, calm. "Ma'am, my daughter was hurt. You don't owe her your silence." After a pause, she led him inside. "I might still have something. My son installed a new doorbell camera last year. It records the sidewalk." They watched the footage together. It was partially blocked by a tree branch, but the audio was clear. Margaret shouting, Ava crying, then the thud of a fall. And then Margaret's voice, sharp, commanding, "You people don't belong here." Jack didn't blink. He copied the file onto a drive, thanked Mrs. Alvarez, and stepped out into the sunlight with something more powerful than anger: purpose. That afternoon, he called an old contact, Lieutenant Eric Shaw, now working with a regional security firm that assisted law enforcement with evidence analysis. "Jack Turner," Eric said with a chuckle over the phone. "Last time I saw you, you were jumping out of AC 1:30 at midnight." "Different kind of mission this time," Jack said. "Civilian target. HOA President. Need your help verifying a video." There was silence on the line for a beat, then Eric's tone changed. "Send it. I'll make sure it's court-grade admissible." Within hours, Eric confirmed. The footage was authentic, time-stamped, and clearly showed Margaret's aggression. Jack now had proof, but he wasn't going straight to the police. Not yet. He wanted Margaret to feel the shift of power. That evening, he waited until the neighborhood quieted. At precisely 8:47 p.m., he walked up to Margaret's driveway and rang her doorbell. She opened the door wearing a robe, surprise flickering across her face before morphing into disdain. "Well, if it isn't the absentee father," she said sharply. "Come to fix your little violation problem?" Jack's voice was even, almost too calm. "You hurt my daughter." She rolled her eyes. "Oh, for heaven's sake." She tripped. Children fall all the time. His gaze didn't waver. "You shoved her. I have you on video." For the first time, her mask cracked, a faint tremor at the corner of her mouth. "You're bluffing." He took a step closer, not threateningly, but with the quiet weight of command that only a man who'd faced war could carry. "I don't bluff. I don't yell. And I don't forget." Margaret's confidence faltered. "You can't intimidate me. I'll call the police." Jack smiled faintly. "Please do. I'll bring them a copy of the evidence when they arrive." She hesitated, searching his face for a lie, but found none. He turned and walked away, every movement measured and deliberate, leaving her standing frozen on her porch. That night, she didn't sleep. Lights flicked on and off in her house until dawn. By Monday morning, whispers were everywhere. Someone had seen Jack's visit. Someone else said they'd heard a recording existed. The HOA group chat went silent except for one message: "Emergency meeting, 6 p.m. tonight." Jack attended. He entered the community hall, wearing his service jacket, shoulders squared, eyes forward. The room quieted instantly. The same people who had ignored Laura's pleas now looked guilty, even fearful. Margaret sat at the front, surrounded by her board. She tried to act composed, but her voice trembled slightly as she spoke. "Commander Turner, this meeting is for members." He set a small speaker on the table and pressed play. Margaret's own voice filled the room. "You people don't belong here," followed by the sound of Ava crying. Then the thud. The silence that followed was absolute. Jack didn't shout. He didn't need to. His words were cold steel. "My daughter came here for peace. You gave her pain. Now you'll face the consequences legally, publicly, and permanently." Margaret tried to stammer an excuse, but the board cut her off. Mr. Lewis, one of the longtime members, spoke firmly. "Mrs. Harlow, consider yourself suspended effective immediately. We'll be contacting law enforcement." Jack looked at the crowd once more. "You all stayed quiet when it mattered. Don't make the same mistake twice." Then he walked out. That night, Margaret's perfect world began to crumble. Her phone wouldn't stop ringing, the board, the police, her own lawyer. The security footage, now verified and submitted, was out of her control. And somewhere across the street, in a small gray house, a Navy SEAL sat beside his daughter's bed, gently brushing her hair away from her face as she slept peacefully for the first time in weeks. Jack whispered softly, "It's over, sweetheart. She won't hurt you again." But deep down, he knew it wasn't fully over yet. There was still accountability to deliver. And he wasn't done until the entire neighborhood understood what happens when power is abused. By sunrise, Crescent Lake Estates no longer felt like a peaceful neighborhood. The illusion of suburban perfection had cracked, and beneath it, the truth crawled out like smoke from a fire. Word of the meeting spread faster than anyone expected, not just among the HOA, but across town. By 8 a.m., Margaret Harlow's name was trending on local social media pages. A neighbor had recorded part of the meeting on their phone the moment Jack played the recording. It wasn't supposed to go public, but once it hit the HOA Watchdog Facebook group, it was over. Comments poured in by the hundreds. Disgusting behavior. That poor girl. She's been harassing people for years. Finally, someone stood up to her. Within hours, news vans lined the street. Crescent Lake Estates, once a gated, exclusive community, was now a symbol of hypocrisy and abuse of power. Margaret stood at her window, phone in hand, watching as reporters gathered near her driveway. Her lawyer's voice crackled through the speaker. "Margaret, listen to me. Do not make a statement. Anything you say will be used against you. We'll argue self-defense, but self-defense," she snapped. She came at me with that stick of hers. How was I supposed to know? Her lawyer interrupted, his tone tight. That stick was a mobility aid, and you're already facing a potential charge of aggravated assault on a minor with a disability. Keep quiet. Margaret slammed the phone onto the counter, pacing the living room. Her empire, the HOA she'd ruled for nearly a decade, was collapsing. Her board had turned on her. The police had already seized her laptop and camera footage, and somewhere across the street, that Navy SEAL and his perfect family were watching everything she'd built go up in flames. Her anger twisted into obsession. "You think you've won?" she hissed, looking through the blinds toward the Turner's house. "We'll see about that." Meanwhile, Jack wasn't celebrating. He'd spent the morning giving his statement to detectives at the county sheriff's office. They were respectful, even deferential, but he could tell they were walking carefully. This wasn't a simple neighborhood dispute anymore. It was a public scandal involving a decorated Navy SEAL and a disabled child. Detective Rachel Lynn, a sharp-eyed woman in her 30s, reviewed the footage again. "This is strong evidence," she said. "The audio's clear, time-stamped, no tampering. The DA's office will want to move quickly on this." Jack nodded. "Good. But this isn't just about one woman. The HOA covered for her. They buried complaints." Detective Lynn leaned forward. "You're suggesting conspiracy?" "I'm suggesting neglect. Maybe corruption." He opened a folder and slid it across the table. Inside were copies of letters Laura had received, HOA violation notices that escalated every time they refused to comply with Margaret's recommendations. Some had forged signatures. Others had illegal fee demands. Lynn exhaled. "You've done your homework." Jack gave a faint, humorless smile. Force of habit. 2 days later, the official charges were filed. Margaret Harlow, aggravated assault on a disabled minor, harassment, and HOA fraud investigation pending. The news made national headlines. Reporters dug into her past, a trail of complaints, discrimination claims, and fines that targeted anyone she didn't approve of. The community she'd ruled through fear was now a stage for her downfall. But Jack wasn't satisfied. Not yet. He'd been through enough battles to know that justice on paper wasn't always justice in truth. People like Margaret didn't stop until someone made them. So he started digging deeper. Late one night, in his home office, Jack reviewed the HOA's financial reports, public records, but hidden behind confusing jargon. His military training had made him meticulous, patient. He noticed patterns, large withdrawals labeled beautification projects, matching the same dates as homeowners' unexplained fines. He cross-referenced the accounts through a friend at the local bank. What came back made his blood run cold. Margaret had been funneling HOA funds into a private account, her own. Tens of thousands of dollars. He called Detective Lynn immediately. "Detective, you're going to want to see this." Within hours, law enforcement executed a new warrant. The following morning, officers raided Margaret's house. Cameras captured her being led away in handcuffs, robe disheveled, hair unkempt, screaming that she was the victim of a smear campaign. Jack watched from his driveway. Arms crossed, expression unreadable. Reporters swarmed the scene, flashing cameras and shouting questions. For the first time in a long while, Crescent Lake Estates was silent, not peaceful but humbled. Weeks passed. The HOA dissolved under pressure from lawsuits and media scrutiny. The neighborhood, once ruled by arrogance and fear, began rebuilding under temporary city management. Neighbors who'd once ignored Laura now stopped by with casseroles, awkward apologies, and tears. Mrs. Alvarez brought flowers for Ava, whispering, "You were so brave, sweetheart." Ava smiled shyly. Her arm had healed, but Jack knew the scars beneath, the kind that didn't show on x-rays. At dinner one night, Ava looked up at her dad. "Daddy, is the bad lady gone for good?" Jack paused, meeting her eyes. "Yeah, sunshine. She's gone. But why did she hate us?" He took her hand gently. "Some people need to hurt others to feel powerful. But when good people stand up, that power disappears." Laura smiled softly, her eyes wet. She picked the wrong family. Months later, the trial began. Jack testified calmly, methodically, every word measured like a soldier's report. Margaret's lawyer tried to argue that she acted in fear for her safety, claiming Ava had swung her cane first. Jack didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He simply said, "My daughter weighs 70 pounds. She has cerebral palsy. Margaret Harlow is lying." The courtroom was silent. When the verdict came, it wasn't close, guilty on all counts. Margaret was sentenced to 5 years in prison, plus restitution to every homeowner she'd defrauded. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed again, asking Jack how he felt. He gave a single line before walking away: "Justice isn't revenge. It's protection for every family that didn't have the strength to fight back." That night, he stood on the back porch, looking out over the quiet lake. The air smelled clean again. No tension, no fear. Laura came up beside him, slipping her hand into his. "She's really gone." He nodded. "Yeah, but we're not moving. This is home. We won't let people like her drive us out." Inside, Ava laughed, the bright, innocent sound that had once been missing from the house. Jack turned, smiling faintly. "You know," he said, "I think she's stronger than both of us." Laura smiled. "She gets it from her dad." But as peaceful as things seemed, Jack knew something else. The story of Crescent Lake Estates wasn't unique. There were other Karens, other power-hungry tyrants hiding behind neighborhood rules and fake authority. And while most people would avoid them, Jack Turner, the Navy SEAL who defended his family with quiet fury, had learned something during this fight. Sometimes the battlefield isn't in another country. It's right in your own backyard. The months following the verdict felt like a deep breath after a long storm. Crescent Lake Estates, once a tight-lipped enclave of control and pretension, was finally starting to heal. The manicured lawns and polished driveways no longer hid secrets, and the silence that used to hang like a threat had turned peaceful again. Jack Turner stood by the lake one crisp morning, the same lake where his daughter used to sit sketching sunsets before everything went wrong. The reflection of the rising sun shimmered across the calm water, and for the first time in a long while, he felt something close to peace. But the peace hadn't come easily. The community was still reeling from the fallout of Margaret Harlow's crimes. After her conviction, the county took over the HOA temporarily to conduct a full audit. The results were worse than anyone had imagined. Missing funds, forged maintenance invoices, bribes, and years of abuse toward residents who dared to question her authority. It was a wake-up call, one that shook every homeowner into realizing how much power they had willingly surrendered. At the first neighborhood meeting after the trial, the room was packed. Gone were the fancy catered setups Margaret used to flaunt. Instead, folding chairs lined the local community center, and the air smelled of cheap coffee and nervous hope. Jack didn't plan to speak, but when the temporary chair asked for nominations for a new board, nearly half the room turned toward him. "Jack Turner," someone shouted. "He's the reason this place is still standing." Applause followed, but Jack raised his hand to quiet them. "I'm not here to run a neighborhood," he said evenly. "I've led enough battles in my life. What we need isn't another commander. We need accountability, transparency, and humanity." He glanced toward his wife, Laura, sitting beside Ava in the front row. His daughter's small hand rested on her mother's knee, her smile shy, but proud. "I'll help rebuild," Jack continued, "but only if we do it right this time. No more threats. No more fines for the color of someone's mailbox. No more fear. This isn't a military zone. It's supposed to be a home. The room erupted into applause again, but this time it wasn't for a hero, it was for a new beginning. Weeks later, Jack and Laura volunteered to help rewrite the HOA bylaws from scratch. They worked with attorneys, city officials, and even disability advocates to make sure the new rules protected residents instead of controlling them. The new document was simple, humane, and fair. It banned discriminatory enforcement, established financial transparency, and required quarterly open meetings. But Jack insisted on one final clause, something personal. No member, officer, or representative of this association shall act with hostility, bias, or intimidation toward any resident, and any violation shall result in immediate removal. That line, more than any, became the cornerstone of Crescent Lake's rebirth. When the bylaws were approved unanimously, Laura squeezed his hand. "You did it," she whispered. Jack shook his head. "We did." Life slowly found rhythm again. Ava returned to school, after long recovery, nervous at first, but quickly welcomed back with open arms. The school counselor had arranged a new program promoting disability awareness. Inspired by her story, she was asked to share her experience, not the pain, but the courage. Standing on the small auditorium stage, her voice quivered at first. "I used to be scared to go outside," she said. "I thought if I just stayed quiet, bad people would leave us alone. But I learned that sometimes you have to be brave even when you're scared. Because being different isn't bad. It's strong." Her speech earned a standing ovation, and when she got off stage, Jack knelt and hugged her. "You're tougher than any SEAL I've ever met," he whispered. Ava giggled. "Does that make me a Navy SEAL pup?" He laughed, the kind of laugh he hadn't let himself feel in months. Meanwhile, the neighborhood transformed. The fences that had divided properties were replaced by flower beds planted together. Monthly community days became a new tradition, cookouts, charity events, and even fishing lessons at the lake. Jack started a local outreach program called Operation Home Guard, teaching homeowners how to identify fraud, organize fairly, and defend their rights. He partnered with local veterans and legal experts to expand it statewide. Before long, his story was featured on a national talk show, The Navy SEAL Who Saved His Neighborhood. He didn't enjoy the attention, but he used it to advocate for others who had been silenced by abusive HOAs across the country. When asked what motivated him to keep fighting, his answer was simple: because if someone like me who's trained to face danger can feel powerless in his own home, imagine how the rest of America feels. We need to protect people where they live. The clip went viral, sparking reform movements in several states. Lawmakers even reached out to discuss the Turner Bill, a proposal to increase transparency in homeowner associations. But behind all the headlines and praise, Jack stayed grounded. One evening, as he stood on the back porch watching Ava and Laura feed the ducks, he thought about Margaret Harlow. She was serving her sentence, quietly now, far from Crescent Lake. He didn't hate her anymore, he pitied her. Power had consumed her until it destroyed her. And now, she was nothing but a name on a court record, a cautionary tale. Jack turned toward the lake. The water was calm again, reflecting the sky in perfect stillness. Laura came up beside him, slipping her hand into his. "Do you ever think about what might have happened if we hadn't fought back?" she asked softly. Jack exhaled slowly. "Every day," he admitted. "But then, I look at her." He nodded toward Ava laughing by the water, "and I know we were meant to fight this battle. Some wars don't happen overseas. They happen in the places we're supposed to feel safest." Laura smiled. "You're still a soldier, even without the uniform." He grinned faintly. "No, I'm a dad. That's the tougher job." That night, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the Turners sat together on their porch, a family whole again, the glow of the lake shimmering like a promise. Crescent Lake Estates was no longer perfect. It didn't need to be. It was real, flawed, but free. And as the wind whispered through the trees, Jack felt the quiet satisfaction of a man who had fought not for glory, not for vengeance, but for peace. Because in the end, justice wasn't about punishing evil. It was about giving good people their home back. And for the first time in a long while, home truly meant peace.